The wind moved slowly through the empty street, carrying dust across the wooden boards like whispers from another time. In the fading gold of sunset, the town of Red Hollow looked almost forgotten, its crooked buildings glowing softly beneath a sky that promised a cold night ahead. Horses shifted near the hitching posts, a loose sign creaked above the general store, and somewhere far off, a lonely crow called into the silence. It was the kind of evening where nothing ever seemed to change. And for one man, nothing had changed for years. Caleb Boone stood at the far end of the street, tall and still as a fence post. His black hat cast a shadow across a weathered face marked by sun, sorrow, and too many quiet days. A thick brown duster hung from his shoulders, worn at the edges, and dust clung to his boots like it refused to let him go. His dark beard was trimmed but rough, and his gray-blue eyes carried the heaviness of a man who had buried laughter along with someone he once loved. Folks in Red Hollow said Caleb hadn't smiled since the winter his wife died. Most believed he never would again. Behind him stood his ranch wagon, and inside sat two children who watched the town with cautious curiosity. 10-year-old Thomas Boone held the reins too tightly for a boy his age, trying to look brave the way he thought his father expected. His sandy hair stuck out beneath an oversized hat, and his serious eyes missed very little. Beside him sat little Rose, 6 years old, wrapped in a pale yellow shawl. She clutched a rag doll missing one button eye, her small boots swinging nervously above the wagon floor. She remembered laughter only faintly, like a song half forgotten. They had come to town for one reason only: the mail-order bride. Caleb adjusted his gloves slowly, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. The idea had not been his. The preacher insisted the children needed warmth in the house again, someone to soften the silence that filled every room of the Boone ranch. Caleb agreed only because Thomas had stopped talking at supper and Rose had begun sleeping with the lantern lit. Then the stagecoach arrived. It rattled into Red Hollow louder than expected, wheels grinding against stone, horses snorting clouds into the cooling air. Townsfolk paused their business, watching with quiet interest. The coach door swung open, and instead of a graceful lady stepping down, a young woman tumbled forward in a blur of skirts and startled motion. She nearly fell face-first into the dust. Gasps turned into muffled chuckles as she scrambled upright, cheeks flushed bright with embarrassment. Her name was Eliza Mayfield. She wore a soft blue dress slightly wrinkled from travel, a cream-colored coat too large for her narrow shoulders, and boots clearly not meant for western streets. Loose brown curls escaped her bonnet, framing a face full of nervous determination and eyes the color of spring leaves after rain. She tried to gather her belongings with hurried hands, only to knock over a small birdcage resting beside her trunk. The cage door swung open and a bright green parrot fluttered out, landing confidently on a nearby crate as if it owned the town. For the first time in years, something unexpected happened. Thomas laughed. It burst out of him before he could stop it, sharp and alive, echoing down the quiet street. Caleb turned sharply, surprised not by the bird or the clumsy woman, but by the sound of his son's laughter. Rose giggled next, covering her mouth as Eliza chased the parrot in circles, apologizing to everyone and no one at the same time. And then, just for a moment, Caleb Boone felt the corner of his mouth twitch. You might imagine that moment yourself, standing there in the dust, watching a stranger bring noise into a life built on silence. You might wonder whether laughter can truly return to a man who believes joy has already left him for good. Eliza finally caught the bird, breathless and smiling despite her embarrassment. When her eyes met Caleb's, her smile softened, uncertain but warm. She stepped toward him carefully, hope and fear walking side by side in her expression. "Mr. Boone?" she asked gently. Before Caleb could answer, a rider appeared at the far end of town, racing hard toward them, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. The urgency in his posture cut through the peaceful evening like a warning carried on the wind. And whatever fragile beginning had just arrived in Red Hollow was about to face trouble far sooner than anyone expected. The rider pulled hard on the reins, his horse sliding to a stop in a spray of dust just yards from Caleb Boone. The animal's sides heaved, foam clinging to its bit, and the man in the saddle looked as though he had ridden without rest for miles. His coat hung open, sweat darkened the collar, and fear sat plainly in his wide eyes. "Boone," he called, voice rough from the ride. "You need to get back to your ranch. Now." The laughter that had filled the street only moments earlier faded into uneasy silence. Caleb's shoulders stiffened beneath his worn brown duster. He stepped forward slowly, one hand resting near his belt, though he made no threatening move. "What happened?" Caleb asked, his voice calm but heavy. "Fence line's been cut clean through on the north pasture," the rider said. "Tracks everywhere. Looked like someone drove cattle straight across your land. And your barn door was hanging open when I passed." A cold stillness settled over Caleb's face. The faint trace of warmth that had almost reached his eyes disappeared just as quickly as it had come. Thomas leaned forward in the wagon, gripping the reins tighter. "Pa, our horses?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He simply stared toward the distant hills, jaw tightening as if old troubles had suddenly remembered his name. Eliza stood quietly nearby, clutching the birdcage against her coat. The bright green parrot tilted its head, watching the tension as though sensing danger. She had arrived less than 10 minutes ago, yet already she could feel the weight pressing down on this family. The hopeful picture she had imagined during her long journey west now felt fragile, like glass about to crack. "I reckon we leave," Caleb finally said. His voice carried no panic, only decision. He turned toward the wagon, lifting Rose gently into place before helping Eliza climb up. She hesitated, clearly unsure where to sit or how close she was meant to be. Dust clung to the hem of her blue dress, and she tried brushing it away before giving up with a small, embarrassed smile. I'm sorry," she said softly. "I seem to arrive at poor moments." Caleb adjusted the reins without looking at her. "Out here, there ain't many good ones." The words weren't cruel, but they weren't welcoming either. Eliza nodded quietly, folding her hands in her lap. Thomas flicked the reins, guiding the wagon forward, trying to act older than his years. Rose watched Eliza carefully, curiosity slowly replacing her shyness. The road out of Red Hollow stretched wide and lonely. Evening shadows grew longer, painting the land in deep gold and blue. Wooden fences passed by, broken in places, and distant mountains stood like silent witnesses. The wind carried the smell of dry grass and approaching night. After a while, Rose scooted closer to Eliza. "Your bird talks?" she asked in a small voice. Right on cue, the parrot squawked, "Easy now." Rose giggled, and even Thomas hid a smile. Eliza brightened slightly. "His name is Jasper. He mostly repeats things he probably shouldn't. That makes two of us," Thomas muttered, earning a quick glance from Caleb that silenced him again. The wagon rolled on, wheels creaking steadily. Eliza watched Caleb from the corner of her eye. He sat tall, eyes scanning the horizon constantly, every movement careful and practiced. This was a man used to guarding more than land. She wondered what kind of grief could carve such quiet into someone. "You built the ranch yourself?" she asked gently, trying to bridge the silence. "Mostly," Caleb replied. "It must be beautiful," she said. "A home with room to breathe." Caleb hesitated before answering. "Used to be." The words lingered in the air long after he spoke them. You could almost feel the emptiness he meant, as if the ranch were less a home and more a memory he refused to abandon. As twilight deepened, they crested a small hill overlooking Boone Ranch. Even from a distance, something felt wrong. One section of fence lay flat against the ground. Lantern light flickered weakly near the barn, swaying in the wind. Thomas swallowed hard. Rose clutched her doll tighter. Eliza felt her own heartbeat quicken. She had traveled across half the country expecting awkward dinners and unfamiliar routines, not danger waiting at the doorstep. Caleb brought the wagon to a slow stop, studying the property in silence. His eyes narrowed, calculating, listening to sounds no one else seemed to hear. Then, from somewhere near the barn, came the sharp crack of a gunshot echoing across the fields. The horses jolted nervously and Rose gasped, grabbing Eliza's arm. Caleb's expression hardened into something fierce and protective as he stepped down from the wagon. "Stay here," he said firmly. And as he walked toward the darkened ranch, hand steady near his holster, Eliza realized she had just arrived in a life far more dangerous than the letters had ever promised. The echo of the gunshot faded into the open fields, leaving behind a silence so sharp it made every small sound feel louder. The wind brushed through the broken fence, rattling loose boards against one another. Caleb Boone moved forward slowly, boots pressing into the dry earth, each step careful and deliberate. The last light of evening stretched long shadows across the ranch yard, turning familiar ground into something uncertain. Behind him, the wagon creaked softly as the horses shifted. Eliza held Rose close without thinking, one arm wrapped protectively around the child's shoulders. Rose trembled but tried to stay brave, her small fingers gripping Eliza's coat. Thomas leaned forward, eyes fixed on his father, wanting to follow but knowing better than to move. "Is Pa gonna be all right?" Rose whispered. Eliza swallowed, forcing calm into her voice. "Your father looks like a man who knows exactly what he's doing." She hoped it was true. Caleb reached the barn door, which hung crooked on one hinge. Lantern light flickered inside, casting uneven shadows that moved like restless ghosts across the wooden walls. He paused, listening. A horse stomped nervously somewhere within. Chains clinked softly, then came a low groan. Caleb pushed the door open wider. Inside, the barn smelled of hay, sweat, and gunpowder. One of the ranch hands, old Mr. Keller, sat slumped against the stall, clutching his arm where blood soaked through his sleeve. A rifle lay nearby. "Keller," Caleb said, kneeling beside him. "Who did this?" The older man winced but managed to speak. "Three riders, faces covered, driving cattle through fast. Said the land don't belong to you no more." Caleb's jaw tightened. "They take anything?" "Not yet," Keller answered. "Shot at me when I tried stopping them." "They'll be back, Caleb," felt like a warning. Outside, the sky deepened into purple dusk. Eliza watched Caleb's silhouette move inside the barn, her heart pounding with questions she didn't dare voice. This was no simple ranch dispute. Whoever had come here wanted fear to settle in before anything else. Thomas suddenly climbed down from the wagon despite earlier orders. "I'm helping," he said quietly, trying to sound firm though his voice shook. Eliza hesitated, then followed with Rose still holding her hand. The dirt felt colder beneath her boots as they approached the barn together. When Caleb stepped back into the fading light, his expression told them enough. Trouble had arrived, and it planned to stay. "Keller's hurt but alive," Caleb said. His eyes moved briefly to Eliza, as if remembering she was now part of this whether either of them intended it or not. "We need water and clean cloth," Eliza nodded immediately. "I can do that." She moved quickly toward the wagon, surprising even herself with how steady she felt. Fear lingered, but purpose pushed it aside. She tore strips from an extra lining in her travel bag without hesitation. Dust clung to her skirt, curls falling loose from her bonnet as she worked. Rose watched closely, admiration replacing fear. "You ain't scared?" the little girl asked. Eliza smiled gently. "Oh, I am. I just don't find it useful to stand still when people need help." Inside the barn, Caleb noticed how carefully she cleaned Keller's wound, hands gentle but sure. She spoke softly to the injured man, distracting him while tying the bandage tight. The children hovered nearby, drawn toward the small pocket of calm she created. For a brief moment, the barn felt warmer. Then Thomas spoke again. "Pa, why would someone want our ranch?" Caleb looked toward the open fields beyond the barn doors. Lantern light flickered across his face, revealing worry he tried hard to hide. "Because of the water," he said quietly. "Creek runs year-round here. Land like this don't dry out easy." "Makes it valuable?" Eliza glanced toward the dark horizon. "So someone's trying to scare you off?" Caleb nodded once. "Looks that way," a distant sound interrupted them, hoofbeats, slow this time. Not rushing, but deliberate. Everyone froze. From the ridge overlooking the ranch, three riders appeared as dark shapes against the moonlit sky. They didn't come closer. They simply watched, motionless, their presence heavy with threat. One rider lifted a hand slightly, tipping his hat as though greeting an old acquaintance. The message was clear. They knew Caleb was watching, and they wanted him to understand this was only the beginning. Rose pressed closer to Eliza, whispering, "They look like shadows." Caleb stepped forward into the yard, standing tall despite the danger, his figure outlined by lantern glow. He didn't reach for his gun. Not yet. The riders turned their horses slowly and disappeared back into the night. leaving behind nothing but uncertainty and the growing realization that the Boone family was no longer facing grief alone. They were being hunted, patiently, by someone willing to wait for the right moment to strike again. Morning came slowly over Boone Ranch, pale light stretching across the fields as if unsure whether it was welcome. Frost clung to the grass, sparkling faintly beneath the rising sun. The broken fence stood like an open wound along the north pasture, and the quiet felt heavier than the night before. Even the birds seemed cautious, their songs short and uncertain. Caleb Boone had not slept. He stood near the corral, tightening a saddle strap with steady hands, though the stiffness in his shoulders betrayed exhaustion. His gray-blue eyes scanned the hills again and again, searching for movement that never quite appeared. Trouble rarely announced itself twice. It simply waited for weakness. Inside the house, Eliza moved carefully through unfamiliar rooms. The Boone home was sturdy but carried a deep stillness, as if laughter had once lived there and then slowly faded away. A faded quilt rested across a wooden chair. A woman's porcelain teacup sat untouched on a high shelf, clean but unused. Eliza noticed these small details quietly, understanding without needing explanation. Rose sat at the kitchen table, watching her. "You cook?" the girl asked. Eliza smiled softly. "I attempt to." She worked with simple ingredients she found in the pantry, sleeves rolled slightly, curls pinned back as best she could. The smell of warm biscuits soon filled the room, pushing away some of the lingering heaviness. Thomas hovered nearby, pretending not to be interested while clearly waiting. "You don't have to stay," he said suddenly, eyes fixed on the table. "Most folks would leave after last night." Eliza paused, meeting his serious gaze. "I traveled a very long way to be here," she said gently. "I think I'll stay long enough to see what kind of people I've found." Thomas nodded once, as if testing whether he believed her. Outside, Caleb met with Keller near the barn. The older man's arm was bandaged, but stiff. Fresh tracks marked the dirt beyond the pasture, clearer now in daylight. Boot prints. Hoof marks, deliberate damage. "They want you nervous," Keller muttered. "Push you into selling cheap." Caleb crouched beside the tracks, studying them closely. These men knew where to hit. "Not strangers?" Before Keller could answer, a cloud of dust appeared on the road leading toward the ranch. A wagon approached, flanked by 2 riders. Caleb stood slowly, tension tightening every line of his body. The wagon stopped just short of the yard. A well-dressed man climbed down, coat clean despite the dust, boots polished in a way no ranchers ever were. His smile was polite but thin. "Mr. Boone," the man called pleasantly. "Name Silas Crow. Thought we should finally meet." Eliza stepped onto the porch just in time to see Caleb walk forward. She felt Rose slip her hand into hers again. Crow removed his gloves slowly, glancing around the property with open interest. "Fine land you've got. Shame about the damage. Hard place to protect with so little help." Caleb's voice remained calm. "State your business." Crow smiled wider. "Simple offer, sell the ranch, fair price. You and your children move somewhere quieter, safer." Thomas appeared beside Eliza, anger flashing across his young face. "We ain't selling," he muttered. Crow's eyes shifted briefly toward the boy, amused. "Bravery runs in the family, I see." The air grew tight. Even the horses seemed restless. "I don't scare easy," Caleb said. "I know," Crow replied smoothly. "That's why persuasion takes patience." He gestured toward the hills behind him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then shapes appeared again along the ridge, more riders this time. Not hiding, watching openly. Eliza felt her breath catch. The scale of it became clear. This was not a simple threat. It was pressure closing in from every side. Crow stepped closer to Caleb, lowering his voice, though everyone could still hear. "Next time, someone might not walk away with only a wounded arm. Children deserve peace, Mr. Boone. Think carefully." Rose pressed against Eliza, trembling. Eliza wrapped an arm around her, but her own fear burned beneath calm determination. She looked at Caleb and saw something changing behind his eyes. Not just anger, resolve. Crow returned to his wagon, climbing in without hurry. "I'll give you 3 days," he called lightly. "After that, decisions may be made for you." The wagon rolled away, riders following like shadows peeling off the hills. dust lingered long after they vanished. Silence settled again, thicker than before. Thomas kicked at the dirt. "We can fight them, Pa." Caleb didn't answer immediately. His gaze moved from the broken fence to the house, to the children, and finally to Eliza standing on the porch holding Rose close. For the first time, the danger wasn't only his burden. Others stood within its reach now. The wind picked up suddenly, rattling the barn doors and carrying distant thunder from beyond the mountains. A storm was coming, and everyone on the ranch could feel that whatever happened next would decide whether Boone Ranch survived at all. The storm arrived before nightfall, rolling over the mountains in thick gray waves that swallowed the sky. Wind swept across Boone Ranch, bending tall grass low and rattling every loose board along the barn. Thunder echoed across the land like distant cannon fire, and the air carried that heavy stillness that comes just before something breaks. Caleb Boone stood beneath the porch roof, watching the horizon darken. 3 days, Silas Crow had said. Caleb knew better. Men like Crow didn't wait when they believed fear had already taken root. The riders on the ridge had not been a warning alone. They had been a promise. Behind them, light glowed warmly through the cabin windows. Eliza moved inside, setting supper on the table, while Rose helped place tin cups beside each plate. Thomas sharpened a small tool at the corner of the table, trying to look useful, trying to feel older than he was. The house no longer felt empty. Even with danger pressing close, life had begun to return to its walls. Eliza stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. The wind tugged loose strands of her brown curls as she pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. "You think they'll come tonight?" she said quietly. Caleb didn't look at her right away. "Storm gives cover," she nodded, already knowing the answer. For a moment they stood side by side, watching lightning flicker far away. "I didn't come here for this," she admitted softly. "I imagined awkward meals and learning how to milk cows badly. Not men threatening children." Caleb glanced at her then. "You can still leave. Take the wagon at first light." "I won't blame you," Eliza shook her head gently. "You keep offering that like kindness. But leaving now would mean abandoning people I've started to care about." Her words lingered between them. Caleb's expression softened, though worry still weighed heavily in his eyes. Inside, Rose laughed as Jasper the parrot squawked something unintelligible, and the sound drifted onto the porch. Caleb listened to it, almost surprised by how much it mattered. "I forgot what a house sounded like," he said quietly. Eliza smiled faintly. "It remembers faster than people do." Thunder cracked closer this time. Caleb straightened. "We should prepare." The ranch came alive with purpose. Lanterns were lowered and covered, tools were gathered. Keller positioned himself near the barn with an old rifle despite his injured arm. Thomas carried water buckets without being asked, determination replacing fear. Eliza helped secure shutters, her movement steady even as wind pushed against her. Night fell quickly under storm clouds. Rain began as scattered drops, then turned into a steady downpour that blurred the world beyond the yard. Lightning flashed, revealing the fields in brief, sharp glimpses. Then the horses whinnied. Caleb stepped into the rain, eyes scanning the darkness. Shapes moved near the north pasture, riders, more than before. "They're here," he said calmly. Eliza gathered Rose and Thomas inside, though both children tried to watch through the window. Rain struck the glass in wild patterns as shadows approached the ranch. Silas Crow rode at the front, coat darkened by rain but posture relaxed, as though arriving for business rather than confrontation. Several riders spread out behind him, blocking the road and circling wide. Crow called out over the storm. "Evening, Mr. Boone. Thought I'd save us both some waiting." Caleb stood firm in the yard, rain running down his hat brim. "You got your answer already?" Crow sighed, almost disappointed. "Stubborn men make hard endings." One rider moved toward the barn, torch in hand despite the rain. Eliza saw it through the window and felt panic rise. Fire would destroy everything. Before the torch reached the hay, a loud crack split the air. Keller fired first, knocking the torch from the rider's hand. Chaos erupted instantly. Horses reared, men shouted, thunder rolled overhead. Caleb moved fast, guiding his horse forward, firing only to drive the riders back rather than harm them. The storm turned everything into motion and shadow, lightning revealing brief flashes of struggle. Inside the house, Thomas gripped the windowsill. "We gotta help Pa!" Eliza knelt beside him. "Your father is fighting to keep you safe. The best help you can give him is staying alive." Rose buried her face against Eliza's shoulder, trembling. Outside, Crow rode closer, anger replacing his calm smile. "You can't win this, Boone," he shouted. Caleb's voice carried strong through the rain. "This land ain't yours to take." Another flash of lightning illuminated the ridge behind the riders. For a moment, Crow's men hesitated, glancing back. More riders appeared. But these were not Crow's men. Lanterns bobbed through the storm as townsfolk from Red Hollow rode into the fields. The preacher led them, followed by ranchers Caleb had traded with for years. Word had spread quickly after Crow's threats in town. Quiet respect had turned into loyalty. "You ain't standing alone tonight, Caleb." One man called. Crow's confidence faltered for the first time. His riders shifted uneasily, now outnumbered. The storm roared louder, rain pouring relentlessly as tension broke. Crow realized the balance had changed. Fear no longer belonged to Caleb Boone. Crow glared, fury tightening his face. "This isn't finished?" "It is," Caleb replied steadily. For a long moment the two men faced each other through rain and lightning. Then Crow pulled his reins sharply. "Ride out," he barked. His men turned, retreating into the storm, disappearing as quickly as they had come. Thunder swallowed the sound of hoofbeats until only rain remained. Silence slowly returned to the ranch, broken only by heavy breathing and the steady fall of water. Eliza stepped onto the porch with the children once the danger passed. Rose ran straight toward Caleb, wrapping her arms around his leg. Thomas followed, trying to hide relief behind seriousness. "You okay, Pa?" he asked. Caleb rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "I am now." He looked toward the townsfolk gathered nearby, gratitude clear though words came slowly. For years he had lived apart, carrying grief alone. Yet when trouble came, people had shown up anyway. The storm began to ease, clouds breaking just enough for moonlight to slip through. In the days that followed, repairs began. Fences were rebuilt stronger than before. Neighbors helped mend the barn. Laughter returned in small moments, first uncertain, then natural. Crow never returned. Without fear to divide them, the valley stood united against him. Life settled into a new rhythm. Eliza learned the ranch slowly, often clumsy but always determined. She burned supper once and laughed harder than anyone when Jasper repeated Keller's grumbling complaints. Rose followed her everywhere, while Thomas began asking Caleb questions again at supper, conversation filling spaces that had long been silent. One evening weeks later, Caleb stood watching the sunset paint the fields gold. Eliza joined him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You're smiling," she said gently. Caleb hadn't noticed until she said it. The expression felt unfamiliar but right. "Guess I am," he admitted. They watched Thomas teaching Rose how to toss pebbles near the creek, their laughter drifting across the warm air. "I thought grief was something you carried forever," Caleb said quietly. "Like a weight that never lifts." Eliza looked toward the horizon. "Maybe it doesn't lift. Maybe it just makes room for other things beside it." Caleb nodded slowly. For the first time in years, the ranch felt like a future instead of a memory. Winter passed, then spring arrived, bringing green fields and running water through the creek Crow had once coveted. Wildflowers dotted the hills, and the Boone house stood brighter, its windows open to sunlight and sound. One afternoon, Caleb returned from the pasture to find Eliza and the children laughing in the yard as Jasper loudly declared, "Easy now!" To no one in particular. The sight stopped him in his tracks. He realized something simple but powerful. The ranch had not been saved by strength alone. It had been saved by connection, by people choosing to stay. Eliza noticed him watching and walked over, brushing dust from her blue dress. "You look like a man thinking heavy thoughts." "Just realizing," he said, "that I ain't alone anymore." Her smile softened, warm and certain. "You never were." "You just needed reminding." The sun dipped low, casting long golden light across Boone Ranch. Wind moved gently through the grass, no longer carrying loneliness but life. Caleb Boone placed his arm around Eliza's shoulders, and this time the gesture felt natural, unforced. Thomas and Rose ran toward them, laughter echoing across the fields. For the first time in years, the sound didn't feel fragile, it felt permanent. And as evening settled peacefully over the land, Caleb Boone understood that grief had not stolen his future. It had simply waited for the right people to help him find his way back to it.